Welcome to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe who are going to offer insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock potential for learning in the early years. Today's episode carries a content warning for brief mentions of sexual abuse and genitalia towards the second half of the episode. If you're concerned or upset by anything mentioned, then please do reach out to your safeguarding lead or someone else for support. Hi and welcome back, and I'm here talking to Anne-Marie Christian about all things safeguarding in early years. And in this fourth and final episode, we just want to draw together lots of the things we've been talking about and give an overview of what successful safeguarding can look like. So Anne-Marie, in all of your experience and all the settings you've worked with, can you give us kind of some ideas around what success looks like in terms of an approach to safeguarding?
So successful safeguarding will look like definitely creating that proactive approach. That's the magic in it, the proactive approach. So how are we raising the awareness and encouraging young children to tell us more about things happening to them? So having those stories, those resources, the posters, is a fantastic one I know from an Australian colleague of mine called Early Warning Signs of when a child gets scared. You know, they start shaking their heart. So they have those in the toilets. So it's a little cartoon image that a child can relate to. Early warning signs that, you know, that something's happening that you want to tell someone. So when you get a bit scared, why are you scared? What's making you feel nervous? So introducing those feelings to a child in the sense of, that's when you might want to tell someone what's going on. So a proactive approach to ensuring that, again, regular training for staff. So keeping safeguarding as a standing agenda in our team meetings, you know, in our safeguarding supervisions, having that safeguarding board in the staff room, having our pastoral care sign for parents, having a safeguarding team. I've really seen the increase of that, a safeguarding team where you have the safeguarding lead, the deputy safeguarding lead, and then you've got kind of other pastoral care people who are all part of the team. But the safeguarding lead is the person who could only make decisions about safeguarding. And then they can delegate after they've dealt with the referral, and then people can support them. So a safeguarding team is good, a pastoral care team. Also upskilling your middle managers, your leaders, raising the awareness through posters. The NSPCC do fantastic posters. They've got fantastic videos that you can show staff in training as well. And again, thinking about strategic safeguarding. So how do we know the impact of your policy in happening? Do you measure the volume of how many referrals you get in a week? Do you compare it every month? So how do we monitor what it looks like in real time? And also, I'd encourage, so if anyone's listening who is management, a manager or an early years owner, it's important to think about spot checks. Do you ever turn up unannounced to your setting to find out what's going on? I certainly did that when I was a manager. And it really helped because has the radar gone or have they still got it? So creating that ongoing culture of vigilance is making sure that whether you're there or not, people have still got their eyes on the ball. So on your website, you know, in your inductions, in your recruitment packs, always having those things where safeguarding child protection, welfare of the child has been mentioned, adding it as part of the job description. So that's what I would say in absorbed in to everything we do, you know, having our workshops for parents to talk to them about the welfare of their child, how they can support the well-being of their children and understand and communicate, understand what checks we should do for babysitters, you know, tutors, be more aware of indicators of when a child could be distressed about something.
I think often you hear a sentence saying that usually we would have done it that way, we just didn't do that today. Or I think it's trying again to, and that can happen, mistakes can happen, human error exists, but trying to get a culture where if everybody's got their eye on it, then it's less likely to fall through the net. Whereas if it's just the responsibility of one person to do whatever it is, then that's more likely that they might have a day when they aren't there or forget or something else happens. I also really like the idea of, you know, we might be dealing with children who are used to being asked to keep secrets or to tell untruths. And so there will be children that we deal with in the early years that haven't got the capacity to know those feelings of wanting to say something, feelings of anxiety, because they've been coached by their whoever it may be into suppressing those. So the idea of actually giving opportunity for children to recognize those feelings, not necessarily coaching children into saying things, but recognizing those feelings is really useful strategy. But again, it's something you have to do regularly. You can't just kind of do it once and then move on, because children need coaching through that experience. When you feel like this can mean this, and then you can do that. So that's really useful.
And also the private parts. So there's lots, the NSPCC have got some fantastic resources. Pantosaurus, they've got the private parts campaign. There's lots of resources that you can already bring in that are there to do as an activity in your setting. You know, introducing the whole thing about touch and consent, the whole thing about boundaries, respect. If someone's making you feel uncomfortable. So have you got a child-friendly policy? Meaning, is there something where if a child was distressed, they know how to tell someone or communicate it to someone? Thinking about our children with learning needs or English as a second language, how simple must it be? You know, do we check in with them every day about how we're feeling today? And, you know, in a sense of that. And another fantastic one is, like I mentioned, stories. There are so many good resources. And again, at the end of this podcast, there'll be a link to various resources that I'm going to recommend, you know, in the notes at the end of the podcast. But there'll be sort of loads of really good resources. And there's so many things that you can do to have as a daily practice in understanding that a child can express something. And likewise, some settings have a named worker, the trusted five that they might have, they go to, all those things. There's so many things we can do, Alistair, in how we could create an ongoing system where at least while they're in the setting, they feel safe. But be mindful, we know about child and child harm, and that sometimes in our setting, a child could be harmed by another child. That's also a factor to be aware of. So I know today we've discussed in our podcast previously child abuse, but we need to be mindful of child and child harm. And unfortunately, it can start as young as early years, because a child could be subject to harm, not knowing the game they're playing is harmful, and then do it to someone else. And I do hear those stories quite regularly as well, in the sense of my career generally, of those every now and then. So we really need to be watching who's monitoring the toileting, you know, area. You know, are we aware of who's gone into that cubicle, or actually potty training, all those little things of how children touch each other or themselves could be indicators. So I thought I'd add that, because it's something we need to be also be aware of in our.
I think that's an important one. And still in our culture, especially in Western culture, lots of adults who are working in settings will be very self-conscious, shy, embarrassed about their own genitalia, about having those conversations where you are sitting with your colleagues in a training space, potentially talking about things like genitals and consent and touch. And that can feel awkward for the people in the room, which is why often those conversations and those staff training meetings are avoided, or they result in things like, you know, inappropriate giggling, because people can't, because of the culture that we've all grown up in, have those conversations without feeling that awkwardness themselves. But all the more reason then to have that training and have those conversations, because we, again, we've talked about this before in the podcast, we need to challenge some of our expectations as adults and that lens that we see the world through, to challenge that. Because you're dead right in terms of things like identifying sexual abuse. It's often the way that children then touch themselves or others. It often occurs in private spaces, because that's where they know that, you know, those things might have occurred to them. So things like in toilets, I've come across it before, in places like in the home corner, in where children find spaces that feel normal to them, because it's for them, even though it's not normal behavior for the adults who are dealing with it, could be very normal for that child. It could be everything that they've known from being very tiny. So all they're doing is, as all children do, acting out their behaviors within the space.
Exactly. And also thinking about the names. So good training would talk about the different names that children call their private parts, their genitalia, because what's quite common, I'm sure you've experienced this as well, Alistair, is when the abuser will name it something else. That it could sound like their teddy bear, or sound like a doll, or sound like a food, cookie, whatever it might be, their pet or cookie. So that's why teaching children safeguarding from early years is really important, about naming the private parts, so we are clear. So I'm just going to give example, disclaimer would be right now for people in the UK, we would call, a vagina and penis being the name of a body part
Yeah.
of a male and female. Okay. And that's something at the right age group, you'll introduce it as a concept of when you talk about head, shoulders, knees and toes, belly button, the navel, ears. You'll also talk about when we talk about our body, we're just talking about our ear hole and our nostrils, and it's just another hole rather than anything
Yeah.
else. So if a child is able to talk about it so early, then it's just another body part. But it's very powerful when later on they might have something to say about it. Then we can be alert to it rather than no education or the silly name they have that the person's given them. That's very common, and I see that a lot in early years in the 0 to 5 space of those cute names.
And I think in parenting in general, parents often will refer to their children's genitalia, and this is a whole other podcast. We'll refer to it as something else. So very rarely do you hear a child who will refer to a penis as a penis or a vagina as a vagina. They've all got another name for it. And actually, that's only purely down because an arm's an arm, a hand's a hand, a thumb's a thumb.
Oh, exactly.
We're not suggesting that everybody goes back into their setting tomorrow and suddenly just starts referring to genitalia by its scientific name. This is about a culture of a setting. It's about agreed policy, and it's about kind of discussion. But what we are saying is there are lots of resources out there to support practitioners on this journey outside of the kind of what can be quite dry policy. There's lots of information and advice. I know you've written for Teach Early Years. You wrote an article for recently.
Yeah, and I'll share some of the tips. So on in the article at the end, I did 11 essential safeguarding ingredients, and we've covered quite a lot of them today, but I thought I'd just outline it now. Having those laminated posters with photos of the safeguarding team, including the governor or the trustee, how to report to the local authority education designated officer, and also having it in the reception area. Having the safeguarding tab on your website is really good, outlining the commitment to safeguarding within your organisation, and referring people to parenting programs or children's centres, etc. Updating staff regularly about safeguarding at least annually, but also having training throughout the year in Twilight, talking about maybe neglect, trauma-informed practice and other things, revising your policy annually, creating that safeguarding team and meeting at least fortnightly to discuss children of concern, reviewing your policy and the impact it has, sign up to the .gov.uk safeguarding papers. NSPCC do a fantastic one called CASPAR, CASPAR. They're amazing. Every week you get an email. Go online. Social media have really good safeguarding people that you can follow, influencers, key organisations that send regular articles daily that you can share with your staff. And ensuring that we recheck and revisit our multi-agency working practices with our colleagues and invite those kind of meetings that we have. Understand GDPR as well and data protection. That's very important when it comes to sharing information. When people call us randomly, are they the social worker? Do we know? How do we ensure we keep things safe there as well? So that's the article. And again, it will be available in the notes at the end of this podcast, as well as other resources I'm going to share.
I think all really useful. And I think over the kind of 4 episodes that we've done, we have touched upon lots and lots of aspects of the importance of safeguarding and the role that it can be. If you got any kind of final thoughts about, well, not just about why it's important, because I think we all understand why it's important, but why should we do it? Why would anybody want to have this safeguarding role?
So my 2 always go-tos is we have to understand that it is a reality. Okay. So in my day job, safeguarding is every day, but in that, outside in the real world, it's hidden. It's a very taboo subject in the general conversation, and it's a hidden form of abuse in a lot we're talking about today. People don't go around, saying, oh yeah, this happened. We find out through case reviews or when they get involved in social work or the police. So if we have a lens where we think the unthinkable and understand it is happening, therefore we need to appreciate the children we already know in our settings that are on the child protection plan or child in need plan, etc., already known. But there's more children that are not known than known. So my message to you all would be, let's try and focus and encourage those children who haven't had that kind of opportunity to or connection to, be that person that someone tells their story to. So how are we relating to that child? Are we this whole thing about attention-seeking children, it should be attention-needing children. Why is this child acting that way? What do I need to do to actually open this child's mind in making them know that I believe in them, value them, and I trust them, and they could trust me? So we just have to be always readily available to that child or that parent or member of staff who wants to tell us their story. So therefore, just being more aware, but also professional curiosity, cultural competence, and definitely disguise compliance is something to be considering too.
Absolutely. And I think those are things that you've covered really well in this podcast. And I think if anybody has any takeaways, those things that you've just mentioned there are the things to really take away and reflect on. Anne-Marie, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you during this entire podcast recording. You've given us some brilliant pearls of wisdom from your vast experience. And again, as Anne-Marie said, there will be some links in the notes attached to this podcast where you can find more about Anne-Marie and her work. But for now, thank you very much indeed, Anne-Marie Christian.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest Anne-Marie for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and Anne-Marie Christian. And if you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your setting and links to loads of relevant resources.